I am back with another concrete flooring video. I looked, and believe it or not, it was 3 years ago when I uploaded a video to the channel here about a concrete overlay that I installed in my wife's med spa in the Denver Tech Center. I'll post a link to that video. But here we are. We just bought this space in Parker, Colorado for her second location. This will be the second location for Beauty Refined. I'll post a link to that as well. And again, we are left with a slab here that has some pretty serious finish problems. And I'll here in a minute show you some details, but it's shocking. Very poorly installed epoxy coating that's currently on the surface in really bad shape. There's also some tile that has got to go. It's ugly. I'll learn more as I get into the space here, but I believe when this office was built 13 or 14 years ago, that tile was throughout the space. At some point in its past, a lot of that tile was removed and this epoxy put down. There is still some tile though, and we're going to get it out. And then we're going to remove this epoxy coating. And at that point, we're going to see what we got. You know, every concrete project is different. You got to work with what you got. And we don't know exactly what we got until we get all this junk off the top of it. At that point, we'll kind of make a decision on which way we go as far as colors and finish. We've discussed water-based stain, acid stain, acetone dye. If it's totally unsalvageable, we may end up with an epoxy coating to get a nice fresh start on top of the concrete here. But again, we won't know exactly which direction we're going to go until we have a look at what we got. So I'm going to show you some details about just how bad it is. And then we'll get the tile out of here. We'll get this coating off of here. You can come along for the ride for all that. And then we will get to work on putting a new finish down. Now, we do have some good ideas for the color and type of finish that we want on this slab for the med spa. We're actually still working on a final design. This is going to be a really cool space. This build out is going to be pretty cool. We're still fine-tuning some of the details. I'm going to do most of the work myself. I may do some more videos on some of these items, some cool wall treatments, concrete countertops, ceiling treatments. I may build light fixtures. It's going to be a really fun and a really neat outcome, I think. So stay tuned for all that. Let's take a look at what we got here and then get started with demo. So I'm going to try my best to help you see some of these issues, but you can see the completely inconsistent texturing in some of this existing epoxy that's on the surface. Really bad shape. There's a lot of these places where it didn't stick to the substrate, and that's these white patches. I've taken a screwdriver and it just pops right through, and you know, it's just hollow under there. There's air. Really bad shape. There's a lot of places where it's just not stuck down to the concrete properly, and I think when we start trying to get this stuff off, it's just going to come off in chunks. We'll see here shortly. One of my favorite examples of how poorly installed this floor is, I don't know if you can see it on the camera here, but there are boot prints in the epoxy. I don't know if they thought this was going to be like self-leveling, and it did not self-level or what, but amazing. Here's another example where it's just not stuck down. Very inconsistent application. I could make a video on what not to do, I guess. But the boot prints, man, that is entertaining right there. Here's another example where the coating is in advanced stages of failing. This here, you can see it just flakes off. It just did not stick to the slab underneath. There's air in a lot of places underneath this epoxy. I think it's going to probably come up pretty easy without too much of a fight. All right, well, there's a couple things to see here. First of all, the tile. Ugly. Got to go. It's going to be a nasty business. I am not looking forward to it. Not one of my favorite things. I'm going to be banging it out manually, and then, of course, getting rid of the thin set, and then get it down to a surface that's relatively clean. You can also see that where the tile meets the concrete slab, somebody installed these kind of concrete ramps to help the level of the tile adjust down to the level of the concrete. So once I get the tile out, I'll be grinding out these ramps. Really what we want is a nice, clean, level, consistent surface of concrete across the entire space that's ready to accept our colorant, and then of course a commercial grade sealer that will protect all of it from the daily abuse that it's going to be seeing. So I think we've seen enough of how bad it is. Let's get started on demo and see what we find. All right, let's talk about base trim. As you can see, there's a gap underneath this base trim, and I think that has something to do with the tile that was in this space originally. Didn't reset the base trim here. And also, it's nice to be able to get our refinishing all the way up underneath there. So for this project, I'm going to be taking all the base trim out. There's a lot of ways you can do it. I find what works best for me is to cut the caulking line with a utility knife. And then this tool right here. This isn't a sales pitch, but if you're doing any more than a room's worth of base trim, this is not optional. This tool here works fabulous. And so what you do is you put it up in the crack there and tap it in, and then you just lift up, and it pops the trim right off. You know, you can struggle with this, but this tool here, you can get it on Amazon or probably home stores. It's a lifesaver. Well, as you can see, I've got all the tile removed here. That was kind of a tough process. In the time lapse, you might have seen I was using this tool. This is an air chisel. I've got a 4-inch chisel attachment for it here. If you do much demolition, you've got to have something like this. Really works good. I've had this tool for a long time and find myself using it for all kinds of things. It's one of those tools where once you have one, you don't know how you live without it. I've got it powered by my 15-gallon DeWalt compressor. It keeps up pretty good, pretty much as fast as I can go. You know, I've got to take a break, and I'm sweating so much my glasses are fogged up and everything. So the 15-gallon compressor runs it as fast as I can keep up, and it works great. You know, you get under a tile, and it can often pop it up enough to where you can get most of the tile at one time, which works great. And then what you see left here is all the thin set that is remaining, and we're going to be using the air chisel again. What we found works best is to lightly mist some water on the thin set. Seems to maybe help it come off a little bit easier, and also keeps the dust down, which is pretty important here. My wife and I, we already did the tile area in the back, and it took us about an hour, maybe a little over an hour, to knock out a couple hundred square feet of this thin set. So encouraged by that, we hope to get this knocked out in a similar amount of time, and I'll put the time lapse on for you. And with that said, let's get started. All right, so we're at a point in the project where we've got to know what the final floor is going to look like. Our design for the med spa is really kind of waiting on a final look at the color and the way it's going to look. And so what I'd like to do is do a little test panel on the floor here in kind of an inconspicuous spot where I'm going to test out some water-based stain. I'm going to put a very kind of generic sealer down so that we really can see how it's going to look with sealer. But to do that, I'm going to go ahead and remove the epoxy. You can see I've already scraped by hand a lot of the epoxy off this particular panel. But what I'm going to be using to remove the bulk of the epoxy in the office is this coating removal tool by Diamabrush. Again, this is not an advertisement, but I did research, and this tool should make pretty short work of removing the epoxy. This is what they call a hand tool. It's going to be run on a 4.5-inch angle grinder. They also make a larger tool, which is what I'm going to rent to do the bulk of the office space here. That'll be on a big rotating floor machine. Like I said, this one is a 4.5-inch tool. I'll be running on my 4.5-inch angle grinder with a dust shroud and the vacuum running. And we'll get this cleaned up. One thing I've noticed is when I scrape up the epoxy by hand, the surface is very hard, almost has kind of a gummy feel to it. And I think that's why the epoxy failed in the first place, the old installation. It just peels right up. I've also tested, and I may show you on camera, places where I've dropped some water on this surface and it just beads up, it does not sink in. And so when we finish removing this epoxy and use this tool, I think we're going to be left with some fresh grains that'll have a little bit of porosity, and they'll actually accept our colorant as well as give us a good surface to bond our sealer to. So I'm going to go ahead and run this little spot with the Diamabrush Coating Removal Tool, get the epoxy off, and then we'll get some a test sample of our water-based stain. So I've got the epoxy removed. It was a little more challenging around the edges than what I was expecting. Had to spend some more time with the concrete or the coating removal tool. And as it turns out, it looks like I exposed more of the concrete grains than I did out here in the center. Or out here away from the walls. So we're going to see if that makes any difference with the stain and the final appearance. But I've also just cleaned it and mopped it so it has a damp appearance right now. And that's the appearance that it would have with a typical color enhancing sealer. And it's just too dark for what we're doing. You know, and that's part of the process here, is to see how it looks at different stages. Right now, right after epoxy has been removed, and with this damp look, it's just too dark for what we're thinking for our design. And so I'm going to go ahead and test some water-based stain. I'm going to be using, it's a Surecrete product called Eco Stain. I've got white. I'm going to put down a coat of white. We're going to see how it looks. I might do another coat of white, and then you know, we'll see how it looks. I do have this pewter color as well, which is a little darker, still a warm color. I may do a little mottled appearance with that if we're not getting enough variation. I can put a little character in it with this. For this test panel, I'm going to be using an HVLP spray gun. I doubt I would do that for the entire, you know, this is like a 2,000 square foot space. But we'll see. I sure could. If it gets just the right appearance, I could use that gun for this whole space. So I'm going to let this dry, and then we'll do our first coat. Oh, I'm going to mask. And then we'll get our first coat of water-based stain down. So I've got this first test panel finished up here. As discussed, I put a coat of white. I put a second coat of white over this whole area. And then on this half right here, I put a third coat of pewter. Now I've also changed the lighting in here from what you saw in the last frame. What was in here was a very cool light, probably 5000K, and I changed the bulbs in here to 3000K, which is going to be much closer to what we expect to use in this space. I've also put a quick coat of a polymer that I use for flooring work. And really all it does is show us the color enhancing feature that most sealers have. It's kind of a wet look. Most sealers do have that feature, and so I wanted to make sure we look at these panels with color enhancement. But what we see here is still a very cool kind of blue tones. It is not what we are looking for this space. And so we're going to have to try something different. All right, well, here we are at test panel number 2. I started trying to find stuff that was available locally. You know, we're trying to get this project going. We're kind of waiting on the floor color here to dictate some other colors in the office. And so locally, I found this product from Brickform called Artisan Stain. And I got to tell you right now, this is a big thumbs down. First of all, it's hard to work with. I must have tried for an hour to mix this product. The pigment rests here at the bottom of the container, just like all stains, but I could not get it up into solution. I must have tried for over an hour and got most of it, but still couldn't get all of it, and it foams real bad when you mix it or shake it. So that was just kind of a pain in the butt. But also, here we are, this is the Sand Bank color, which is supposed to be kind of a warm, kind of light color, but very cool. It has these blue tones in it still. And additionally, it has this kind of spiderweb crack look to it, which we have not seen in any of the other products. Now, there is no artificial light in here right now. This is just natural light from windows. And so what you're seeing is just natural light. And this, again, is not going to work. This is where I applied the water-based stain. This is no stain at all. This is just the clean, fresh concrete I left as a comparison. This is the Brickform Artisan Sandbank water-based stain, and it's just not going to work, so we'll try something else. All right, so I'm here at the 3rd test panel, and for this panel I used a product by Smith Paints called Color Floor. It's their water-based concrete stain. I've worked with this product in the past. I like it. It's easy to work with. The colors are predictable and they do what you expect them to do, which I have not had luck with the other products. This one here, we had to make a custom color. And I have 3 test panels here where we experimented with different levels of 3 pigments. And those are white, natural, which is kind of a natural warm gray, like what you'd expect to see in concrete. And also their desert sand color, which is kind of a tan color that we used in very small amount to add some warmth. And the final selection is this panel right here. This is 10 parts white, 2 parts natural, and 1 part desert sand. Turned out really cool. I mean, it's got a lot of variation in it. Has the right tones that we're looking for, the warmth that we need. And so, super excited to have this selection made. Now we can move on and get, wall colors and cabinets, countertops. That all can be kind of nailed down at this point now that we have a final product for our floor. So real excited about that. We've got a couple of construction items to knock out here at the office, and then I'll be able to knock out the entire floor. So excited for that. And we'll keep you along for the ride for that. And that's it for this step of the process. All right, so now that we've got our plan together for the coloring, it's time to actually start getting this old epoxy off the floor. And so the first step for me is going to be the edges. And to do the edges, I'm going to be using the Diamabrush Coating Removal Tool. This is on a 4.5-inch angle grinder. You can see I've got the Diamabrush shroud here. This is pretty important because it does get extremely dusty. And this particular shroud has a feature where I can actually get right up close to the edges by lifting up this door here. Kind of cool. I'll be hooking the vacuum to this part of the shroud. Also on the vacuum, wanted to show you, this does create very fine dust, and I find that it plugs up the vacuum very quickly, the filter in the vacuum. And so what I've got here is a dust separator. This goes between the dust source and the vacuum. And this contraption here, it's like a cyclone or a centrifuge for the dust. And it drops the dust, a lot of the dust, I would say 95% of the dust ends up in the dust separator before it gets to the vacuum. Works really good. I found that really eliminates the need for cleaning out the filter in a vacuum a whole bunch. So I'm going to show you how this works. I have found that the coating removal tool, while it does work well, it does take quite a bit of effort, some time to get all the epoxy up off. Kind of varies depending on how well the epoxy is stuck to the floor in different places, but it'll take a little bit of time here. Pretty big office space, so this is going to consume quite a bit of my time to get it all ready. The main part of the floor, away from the edges, I'm going to be doing with a big floor machine, also with a Diamabrush Coating Removal Tool, but a much bigger version, and it won't be nearly as labor intensive as what I'm about to show you. All right, well, it's time to get the epoxy removal process started here. As mentioned before, the space in our office here is probably 80% covered in a very poorly installed coating of epoxy. It's coming up in places and looks terrible. And to get the process started, I've rented this machine here. This is called a floor polisher or a floor maintainer. You can put a variety of different attachments on this tool. This particular model has a water tank here, which is a really cool feature. With this lever here, you can actually apply some water as needed to keep dust down, and that actually works really good. The attachment that I'm using for removing the epoxy is a tool from Diamabrush called their Coating Removal Tool. And it's got these diamond blades, I'd call them almost fins, sticking down from the tool. I'll show you a picture. And it's designed to remove gummy coatings like epoxy, mastic, etc. I've been running this for several hours now, and unfortunately it is just not working, at least not the way I thought it would. It'll spin on the epoxy and eventually I'll wear a hole through it, but it takes a tremendous amount of time. I would be in here for a week doing it this way. I'll show you here in a minute on this particular space. So I've tried my best with this. I think we're going to have to try something a little bit different. I am going to try for a little bit longer here this morning, but not impressed with how this has performed so far. So I just spent, I don't know, about 15 minutes working on this really just a 12 square foot area. And as you can see, I made many passes over all this. There is still a lot of epoxy left. I'm sure the camera's not showing it all, but all these kind of beige patches is epoxy, lots of epoxy in here, in the corner here. And so, you can see that it's just not going to be realistic to do 2,000 square feet of office space with this method. So I'm going to probably work at it here again. I have a 24-hour rental on this machine. I'm going to stay at it here for a little while, but definitely going to have to do something different. All right, here we have the next level up in concrete grinding nastiness. This is a 10-inch concrete floor grinder. Very commonly available at rental centers. I just rented this from Home Depot. This is my third dance with this type of concrete grinder, and I would call it a love-hate relationship for the most part. Typically you'll get the job done, but it is a wrestling match. A lot of the time, loading it in and out of whatever method you're using to haul it is difficult. It's very heavy. Getting into your space, and then it's pretty darn slow. I spent 12 hours at it yesterday. Figure I have at least another 12 to go, and so I'm going to be getting after it here shortly, but just wanted to discuss a little bit about how this works. There's a 10-inch diamond grinding blade mounted on the bottom here. You can do this either wet or dry. I have never done it dry myself. You'd have to have a special vacuum system. The vacuum would attach to that port right there. A typical shop vac I don't think is going to work, or it would get clogged very quickly, and so you need a special vacuum system. I'm going to be doing this wet. You can see the hose is attached to the back of the grinder there. I use just enough water to keep the dust down, obviously, but also cool the blade and make sure the blade is free of cuttings. And it makes a little bit of a mess, no doubt, but it's not like water's running everywhere. It just makes a mud or a slurry on the floor that we have to clean up. It's pretty slow. I was just saying, probably 24 hours of grinding to do this 2,000 square foot space is kind of what I'm figuring. It is getting through the epoxy. It takes a little bit of time. We've scraped off most of the epoxy in the space, but there are places where we have not been able to. And it does take that epoxy off with some effort. And then, of course, everywhere else where there was tile or the epoxy, it's getting a nice, fresh set of grains for us to be able to put stain and then eventually our sealer down. So with all that said, we're going to get started. I'll set up a time lapse for you here so you can kind of see how it works. And let's get after it. All right, got done with the 10-inch floor grinder. It definitely turned out to be a little bit more work than I had expected. I figure over the course of 2 days, I ran it for about 27 hours, and this is a 2,000 square foot space. Definitely took a lot of passes over each spot. It was able to work down through the old epoxy, but it was a lot of work. And as you can see, hopefully you can see it on the camera, there's several places in each of the areas where the grinder just couldn't get to. And these areas are just a little bit lower than the floor around them. And so, of course, that big grinder blade can't get down to them where there's just a little low spot. And so I'm gonna have to hit these spots with the 4.5-inch angle grinder with the Diamabrush Coating Removal Tool. I've been doing it for a couple hours this morning, and it does work very good. Makes short work of these little spots. I'm also going to be hitting the edges. I've done some edges previously, but I'm going to make sure I get all the edges knocked out, and then kind of really get this thing ready for our stain. Of course, before that, though, we're going to have a huge cleaning process. The grinder makes a kind of a big muddy mess. The grinder, the hand grinder is, I'm doing that with a vacuum. It does not leave much mess. In fact, it's pretty clean. But, with the big floor grinder making a big mud mess, we've got a lot of cleaning to do before we're ready for the stain. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get after it again and see if we can get this buttoned up. I decided to add a special chemical as part of the cleaning process. What you see here is the application of Green Clean, which is a special product from Smith's. It's an acid detergent solution that helps clean and provide a small amount of texture for the stain and sealer to adhere to. I rolled the product on so that there was even coverage. Then it needs to sit on the surface for about 20 minutes. And finally, I went over the surface with a large floor scrubbing machine. Followed that up with a mop as many times as necessary until the rinse water was nice and clean. I performed this procedure in small sections so that I was able to complete the cleaning process before the Green Clean dried on the surface. This Green Clean process is not required, but helped me feel comfortable that the surface was absolutely clean and ready for the stain. I found that it's important that you don't overlap sections where Green Clean is applied because the appearance of the final floor may be different in areas that got two treatments. All right, well, after an incredible amount of labor and time, we've got the surface ready to go, and it's ready for the stain. What you see here, hopefully it shows up on the camera, is a ground concrete surface that is ready to accept the stain. You know, there's a little bit of variation that you can see, you know, different ways the grinder interacted with the surface, different ways the cleaning agents acted with the surface, the Smith's Green Clean. And then we have spent a ton of time cleaning to make sure the surface is absolutely without a speck of dirt or dust or anything. If I would eat off this floor right now, it is so clean. So the surface is ready to go. We've applied plastic around the walls, probably a little bit of overkill. We're not having a paint fight in here, but we are sure that we're not going to get stain on anything that shouldn't have stain. To apply the stain, I'm going to be using this pump sprayer. I went through a variety of different sprayers to find exactly the right one. A couple of different models like this that were cheaper. Seemed like it was either too coarse of a spray, bigger drops than I'd like, or too much spray. And so this one, DeWalt, of course, a top name in tools, had multiple tip options that came with the sprayer. Kind of a nice feature. And this one has just the right amount of spray, and the spray drops are the right size. And so we're going to be using this pump sprayer. I've got a filling station set up just outside, and that's where I'm going to be filling this as needed. I've mixed up the stain in 9 1-gallon containers. That was easiest for me to kind of meter the stain into and make it so I can shake each unit before putting it into the sprayer. And I can also monitor how much I'm using. Now the stain, as mentioned before, is Smith's Color Floor product. And the stain is designed to be mixed 1 part stain to 4 parts clear liquid. And in our case, being on a concrete floor like this, the clear liquid is going to be made up of half distilled water and half Base Boost. Now, Base Boost is a Smith's product that is designed to be added to this system to help densify the surface as well as promote adhesion. And so it's going to be 1 part stain, 2 parts distilled water, and 2 parts Base Boost. And I've shot tons of color samples and samples to, you know, perfect my application technique. And I gotta say, the stain has a tenacious bond. It gets onto the floor, and when it's dry and cured, it is not coming off there unless you grind it off. It's a very strong bond, which I'm very excited about. The stain itself, and I talked about the dilution, now I'm talking about the stain. You know, we did tons of color panels and samples and look at it in this light, look at it in that light. And what we came up with is 10 parts white, 2 parts natural, and 1 part sand. And I'll put up the color chart from Smith's Color Floor here so you can see what I'm talking about. But the goal was kind of a warm creamy color with some warm grays, and just had a lot of warmth to it. And so the 10 parts white, 2 parts natural, and 1 part sand is what we ended up with for our color. And so that stain mixture goes into 1 part of that with 2 parts distilled water and 2 parts Base Boost. I had ChemLab set up at my house this morning, mixing up 9-gallon jugs of that. The space here is a little under 2,000 square feet. I think I have more than I'm going to use. Didn't want to be looking for it, you know, so rather be looking at it than for it. And so I've got plenty of stain. You know, with my technique of applying it, I think we're going to have just a little bit more than we need. So what I'm going to do is make a final walkthrough, make sure there's no debris or insects that have walked out on the floor over the past evening. And then I'm going to start applying stain and work my way out to the door. And then it's going to sit for 24 hours to fully cure. Try to get some time lapse for you. I am going to be moving quickly, but I think I can get a couple of good shots. And with that said, let's get started. All right, well, we got our water-based stain applied yesterday. It has now been 24 hours, which is about what's required to fully cure the stain. And looks pretty good, a lot of variation, which is kind of what we expected. And we're gonna proceed with the sealing process. Now, the first step in the sealing process, I'm gonna be using Duraamen's products, and we're gonna be using the Perdure E32, which is their water-based epoxy primer. And we're gonna be rolling this out. We're gonna be taking extra effort to avoid roller marks. I've kind of perfected my technique with back rolling to avoid roller marks in products like this. This is an epoxy product, so it's two parts, A and B. You mix them for 3 minutes, and then there's a 30-minute induction time. That's occurring right now for my first batch. With a floor of this size, I'm going to do it in 4 batches. I have 2 3-gallon kits, and I'm mixing up 1.5 gallons at a time. The pot life is 45 to 60 minutes, and so I'm going to be working as swiftly as I can by myself here. We're going to be getting the product down, rolling in one direction, and then back rolling in a perpendicular direction. I'll get some video to show you what I mean. And so, yeah, E32 epoxy water-based primer. And then this product is going to need between 4 and 24 hours. That's the window of time I have to apply the next coat of water-based urethane sealer. So I'm kind of going to be managing time. Going to get this down today. We'll see kind of how the timing works. I'll probably be back early tomorrow morning to start the next step. So with all that said, let's get started with the epoxy primer. All right, well, yesterday I applied the E32 epoxy primer, and it only needs really about 6 hours to cure enough to come out onto the surface and apply the next coat. Because of the way the timing worked out yesterday, it is now the next morning, and it's been about 19 hours since I first applied the E32. The surface looks pretty cool. The E32 is color enhancing. I don't know if you can tell on the camera, but it really brings out a lot of the character from that water-based stain I put down, and looks really cool. So excited to see how the final product turns out here after the next step, which is application of the Perdue U45. Now this is a polyurethane. It's a water-based polyurethane. It's matte sheen, which is going to be a really nice setup for the office here. And so this is also a 2-part product. It mixes 4 parts A to 1 part B. And I'll be mixing that up. There is no, because it's not an epoxy, there is no induction time. So I'll be able to mix it up and get right out here and start rolling it down. Very similar process on the rolling. I'm going to be taking extra care to avoid roller marks. And so I'll get the product down first and then back roll it in a perpendicular direction. That'll get us a nice smooth finish for the U45. So I'm going to get to mixing, and based on what I found yesterday, it'll take me about 3 hours to roll out this little bit less than 2,000 square feet. All right, well, here we are, and the floor is finished. So I did the first coat of U45. It did take me about 3 hours to get that down. I waited 10 hours and came back late that evening and did the second coat of U45. And now it has been 3 days. I was fortunate to have plenty of time to let the floor fully cure. Been 3 days. It looks beautiful. It's nice and hard. It feels great, nice and smooth. And it's a done deal. Did want to talk about some volumes for the sealing process. I've been talking about a lot of square footages during this video, around 2,000, a little less than 2,000. I measured it out exactly. It is 1,750 square feet that I finished for the concrete floor here. And so for the E32, that's the water-based epoxy primer, I used about 3.5 gallons in the end, and that's, minus all the waste. What I actually put down on the floor was about 3.5 gallons, maybe just a little bit more than that, maybe 3 3/4 gallons. For the first coat of U45, I used 4 gallons. And for the last coat of U45, I was able to use 4.5 gallons. Now these are all three of those numbers are a little lower than the recommended coverage from Duraamen for those products. I did feel like I was trying to get it down as heavy as I could without having problems with roller marks or running or other issues. So I feel pretty good about the coverage. Didn't use quite all the product that I had expected. There's always going to be some waste. The numbers that I'm quoting are what I actually put down on the floor. So those are important to kind of consider for future projects, or if you're trying to do some math on how much product you might need. I've got a ton of work to do now. Obviously going to be putting base trim back in. I've already removed the plastic from the walls, the masking that we put up. I'm going to be painting walls, like I said, base trim. I'll be taking some pictures and video after that. We'll do a little walkthrough right now so you can kind of see what the finished floor looks like. But to really see what the space is going to look like, we need to finish out some other things here. But super excited to have it finished. I mean, this project, as all projects, ended up being a lot more time than I had planned. Really a total of about 3 weeks of time to remove the epoxy, grind, both with the big grinder and the small grinder. And then we had the green clean, the cleaning and etching process that took a lot of time. The cleaning process over and over again with different machines, mops, vacuums. and then of course the staining process and the sealing process, all in about 3 weeks. But now other projects to get started. Like I said, we'll do a little walkthrough and I'll show you some pictures and video of the final product. All right, well, as you can tell, the concrete refinishing project is completely finished. In fact, we've had the med spa here in service for a couple of months now, and I wanted to take that much time to kind of reflect on the whole process, consider what worked well, what I would have done differently, and do we really like it? And now that we've had the floor actually being used and in service, I can finally answer those questions and offer you some conclusions. And the first conclusion is time. Time, you know, on these projects, it always seems to get away from you. And it certainly did on this project. I figure I was at it full throttle for 3 weeks straight. Now, this is a pretty big space. It's 2,000 square feet. I did this process almost completely by myself. Of course, my wife helped here and there, but for the most part by myself. And I had a lot of prep. And prep was by far the biggest time requirement for this. And so, you know, removing that old epoxy was kind of a pain. And then the grinding and cleaning process took up a tremendous amount of time. But after that, after the prep was finished, things went pretty smoothly after that. The stain and the sealers all went as planned. But just wanted to mention the time required for these type of projects, the concrete refinishing, can surprise you. So just be aware of that. Next, the importance of color testing. You know, I went through several brands of stain. Once we landed on the Smith Color Floor product, several iterations of mixing colors to get just the right combination. And if we hadn't done all that color testing, we would not be happy with the outcome. So I wanted to make sure you understood that it's important to do that testing, and I think it's important you do it on your actual slab. You know, concrete is different depending on when it was poured, what decade. You know, it can be much different color, different suppliers of the cement, etc. So I do think it's important to do the testing on your actual slab and not try to pour a fresh piece of concrete to try to replicate your colors and do the testing that way. I think it's almost impossible to do that accurately. Now the prep process, you know, the grinding is very important. I do believe that. That big floor grinder is a pain in the butt, but I do think it's required. It gives you a fresh start. You know, it removes any damage that may have happened in the past. It gives you a blank canvas for you to apply your stain and sealers and really get a consistent result. And that's what you really want when you're refinishing concrete. So I do think the grinder is important. The grinding process is important. Getting all the way up to the edges and making sure you got all the low spots. It takes a lot of time, but I do think it's worth the effort. Then the importance of perfecting your application technique. In particular with applying stain. You know, I went through several different spraying setups to make sure I got it just right. And then your technique with the sprayer is important as well. You want the material to be applied consistently throughout the entire space. You don't want it to be different in one room or at a transition. So it's important to practice to make sure you get it just right. Along with the practice, when you apply sealers, you want to avoid roller marks. And the back rolling process to avoid roller marks does take a little bit of practice. Now that's something that I've been working on for several years. Both on flooring projects as well as concrete countertops. And so felt comfortable with that process. It did work out perfectly. You couldn't find a roller mark in here. It did work out very well. But it does maybe take some practice to feel comfortable with it before you try to crunch out a huge space like this. Now, speaking of sealers, I think it's important to mention that you want to use a high quality sealer setup or system, a sealer system. I use Duraamen products. I have used them in the past and have had great results. I'm not sponsored by Duraamen, but did my research and found that those were going to work best for me. There are other great sealer products out there, although I don't know that you're going to find them at your local hardware store. Just wanted to point out that sometimes you're going to have to order and ship. Do your research and make sure you get the right sealer system for you. Also, I would recommend contacting the manufacturer and ask for their recommendation for what products to use and what prep is required for your particular space. Give them as much history on your concrete slab as you can, and they should be happy to give you time to give you their opinion on which of their products is going to work best and how best to apply. In the end, we are very happy with the final product. The colors turned out beautiful. They really are complementary to everything we have going in the space, and really feel like it's going to be a durable, long-lasting surface for the med spa here. Already had it in service and have had some minor abuse, really no damage at all. It's really been very impressive. If you have any questions on what I've talked about or shown, or what I haven't talked about, if I missed something, feel free to drop a comment. I will be happy to respond to you very quickly. Thanks for watching. I know it's been kind of a long video, but sure appreciate you coming along for the ride here, and we'll see you next time.